kind of stuff. All right. So the goal was for you to have a working group in those buckets, those focus areas that we gave you, worship and training and family. And so what we want you to do is, I've got a second mic here. And what I want you to do is be able to come on up, tell us those challenges. You can give us a little synopsis of how you got to where you were, and do the challenges. And then that one takeaway, and I keep on saying that because that's the hard part, is just to focus on one effort and make it the key component. So I'm going to start with worship 1, which I don't know which one that's going to be. Ted, rock, paper, scissors. Lizard, Spock.
I want to know what Brandon said first.
All right.
Okay, good morning. I guess we were worship 1, room 142, in case you were wondering what room we were in. So the question we were looking at was, how do we develop worship? And we discussed a variety of challenges. The bottom line, and I'll just state that and we can come back to it, is that there was a loud cry for having authentic worship. So, and what that was described as was basically saying, okay, if we're going to be involved in a chapel, we're looking for a chapel worship service in which I, as a minister ordained by a particular denomination, feel comfortable, but I can be true to those convictions and conduct a worship service regardless of the size, whether it's 5 people all the way up to a couple hundred, but regardless of the size, that I can invest in, or we as a chapel team can invest in that congregation. And so that idea of being authentic in that sense was very important. That also comes at a cost, because given the size of the post, you might be the only chaplain, for example, an Anglican, right, or whatever the endorsement background is. There might be only 1 or 2 of you. Where there's 1, there's always 2, right? Or 3, there's always 4. But there was a recognition that level of commitment to a chapel would bear some resourcing responsibilities and costs for the individual chaplains plural, to engage in that type of worship on a regular basis. We also talked about, kind of circling that whole topic, was the difficulties of being shoehorned into a chapel in which there were conflicting interests or passive participation. So that you're coming in and you're expecting to be a part of a team, but then the team is perpetually gone or not really interested in any investment, which could include anything from just simply not showing up to not being involved time-wise or family-wise to that particular ministry. So that's a source of discouragement, but it's also a challenge that gets back to the idea that, okay, are we allowed as chaplains, can we be resourced in such a way to have authentic worship? And so there's a lot of nuances to that conversation. Now, sir, that's kind of the bottom line. Do I turn it over to Brandon?
Wow,
or
that's it? All right.
All right.
No,
I'll
that's
sit down.
fantastic. Okay. Anybody have any questions for him, though? I mean, this is supposed to be their presentation, but if you have hey, that comes to mind with a question, we can give you a mic and do that.
Yes, sir.
I'll do the passing of the mic.
Was there any thought or any comments on leadership on the worship side, and not specifically for the different congregations, but above that at the garrison or the division level? I know at Campbell we have a pastoral coordinator, and from what I have been told, that a lot of times we as chaplains don't really work that position. And when we have had people in there really work it, it's dividends with our different services. But I wonder if that may have come up.
Well, I suggested that the senior chaplains do all the preaching, and that got shot down immediately. But there there was some discussion on that. We didn't dive deep in it, but the experience of a number of the individuals in the group was, okay, I'm going to Fort Drum, for example, or Fort Campbell or wherever, and we've had some senior chaplains that say this is how we're going to staff the chaplains or participate in the ministry. They're there for 18 months or 24 months. Deployments take place, and you have another crew that comes in, so there's not a consistent policy. And so that creates some turmoil for the chaplains that are trying to effectively have continuity at a chapel. So the regime changes mean that there's staffing changes that aren't anticipated or helpful. Yeah.
I would add in, I'm going to switch with you. Okay. I'm going to add in that the idea that we do some functional change. As you go back and you start to build data, I can invalidate that Installation Management Command, and I know Don is here representing them, but we're in a moment, it's a fantastic moment, we're in a moment of change where the Army is willing to do some functional change, and that's good. So we have to go back and give them the ideas and the data that would make sense. So to your point of like pastoral coordinator, there's a Army position to do that. If there's an Army position, then we can work to get an Army chaplain into that position to do that. So we want to build the spaces, and then we fill it with the right spaces, faces. And we are in the moment when spaces are being reallocated. We're not doing it the way we've always done before, if you hear what I'm saying. That's good. I mean, we have an entire new command, Futures Command. Guess what? CAC's involved in that. So this is the right time for us to have the dialogue with leadership and give all that data back to Installation Management Command, because they own that. And as you have opportunities and dialogues, please tell them what will help to make this all better, specifically in worship. Any other questions? Yep, Dave.
The argument was yes, that does play well. Because they're not looking for a model per se, but they're looking for that tighter community. The word authentic kept coming up. Not that we defined it with a lot of detail, but that seemed to be less of a concern. Small was okay. Did I accurately reflect that for our group? Yes. Okay. Yeah, and the idea, that the rationale behind that was there's a lot of ministry that takes place at the unit level, but on that Sunday, it does give an opportunity for spiritual formation if it's a small group. Not that they're trying to keep the group small, but if that's the way it works out, then those particular chaplains would welcome that type of ministry environment.
All right, let me get Brandon to do the next one.
So for our group with worship, we looked at constraints or barriers, and we looked at time, location, worship as entertainment, integration of ages, purpose, mission, consistency. In a sense, the labels are off. It's called Chapel Next, or it's called the gospel service, but you really don't know what you're going to get if you go there, or you're assuming one thing and getting the other. So that was one barrier. Personalities versus purpose, where it depends on who's the pastor of the service, depends on what you're going to get versus the purpose of the service. So there's an inconsistency was a barrier. Looking at integration of programs as well as personality of giftedness. And then for other barriers, transition, passing the baton of leadership through PCS, but also through training cycles, right? All of a sudden the division deploys, and now do we close down a service? That's a barrier. How do we manage in that? And then we talked about Chapel Next as a movement to a program to then an institution. So there's almost like a growth process where it went from being more organic in a sense to then more still. Rank tension, rank versus giftedness, and how does that work when it comes to structure? Talent management, is there a wrong fit? Lack of teamwork, Lack of resources, is there a way to rapidly resource ministry that's happening instead of it taking as long as it takes? Quality of the caregivers, the quality that are in the different services. And then the difference between the emphasis that's put on IMCOM and that's put on ForceCom. That often there's a disparity. So if you go from the BCT, for me, for instance, you go from the BCT chaplain to the community pastor, and people go, oh, what'd you do wrong? And I'm nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. And looking at, even within our own chaplain corps, as realigning that, and maybe even so that was that. And then as we looked at solutions, there was a lot to all those barriers. One of the solutions we came up with, and I think as a metaphor maybe, that would be helpful for us, and it came out when we said, maybe it's like Chapel Next is giving birth. And you still have Chapel Next, and you also have something else new. And then as we sort of processed that, we said not just Chapel Next, but maybe all the services. What would it look like for almost like a reproduction of a gospel service or others? And then the more we kind of process that for a solution is maybe the metaphor of parents and children supporting. Because when you look at maybe a next generation service, you go, well, it costs too much. But in our families, you wouldn't say your college students, they're not bringing any money in. They're costing a lot. But are they worth that? And by investing in that, do we get some output? And then as we kind of processed that analogy even further, we looked at models. And even like in Hawaii, we've got Fort Derusi, which is a retiree service that brings in a lot of money. And how can they look as almost like grandparents that then really care about their kids and their grandkids? So the grandparents give money for childcare for the PWOC and for other things, just like grandparents would go to a home and watch their grandkids. And they're excited about that. And is that a positive missional? And then a parent, which might be the main post chapel service, that has 200 people in a large building but doesn't see the younger soldiers, saying, hey, maybe a Sunday night, and we could help fund some of that. So I think a metaphor that we had was just this idea of birth and life and generations, and realizing that generations can have it. It's not either or, it's all three. We can have grandparents and parents and children functioning in a community. And then with that, the other piece was, if we were to look at ForceCom and IMCOM as being equals, then we would look at that systemically. In a sense, I mean, however we want to look at it, even if we continue with the metaphor of family, look at it as a mother and a father. They're different, but they're both important. IMCOM stays home. IMCOM cares for the family. IMCOM does all these other things. Father goes to work. He's going to go to war and fight and whatever else. Both are important. And I don't know, you don't have to like it. Any metaphor breaks down. But anyway, that's this idea. Then, if IMCOM runs religious support, and it's equal with funding, and then, like you mentioned, the pastoral coordinator or the community pastor that's working with IMCOM is above those things and saying, hey, how do we support the Catholic service and how they're going to do some things, as well as the Protestant, as well as the gospel, and we're saying, let's do this. Let's figure out, and then how do we nest that with religious education? And then as it trickles down with also those again, if you use the metaphor, the children, could the battalion chaplain have a service in their day room midweek? Could there be an evening service at something else? There's different ways you could do those things. And then the question comes, how do you fund it? Oh, there's lots of different ways. But we have to stretch and realize that 15 soldiers that come on a Sunday evening in a battalion day room are 15 single soldiers that aren't going to come to the main post chapel. So it's kind of thinking about that. And then that was our whiteboard analogy, is looking at, this would just be like, so how does Chapel Next then go to an evening service, and how do they stretch in different areas to resource these small groups, religious education, and realize that it all funds. We have, PWC is important. And MOPS is important, and the Bible study that's at the barracks, as well as the evening service on a Sunday night, because you're thinking about next generation, and it's different. And there's a different structure, but we're all part of the family. And then what we said with if Chapel Next was that model, we said, let's take it up a step further, and let's look at the pastoral coordinator that's not only supporting the community pastor. Think about the community pastor position rather than the brigade chaplain that ends up getting fired, and then we need a place to put them. Think about the community pastor position as a IMCOM brigade chaplain. That at the IMCOM level's goal, just like the brigade chaplain's goal is to mentor, support, and encourage battalion chaplains, the community pastor role could be to sit down and mentor and support and encourage and fund the gospel service, the Protestant service, the Anglican service, the Catholic service, and thinking through, we want all of our children, right? If you use the same analogy, we want all of our children to thrive, even though all our children are different. And each different children have needs. And then there's various levels, and not picking favorites. So I think that's one thing that the organic model or even this parenting model kind of makes sense. But I think it begins to, so that's at least our start to this idea of what is a takeaway. What is something we could try to do? I think it starts with looking at IMCOM and FORCECOM and saying, hey, we're equals. And that's kind of what the pilot program is, in some areas, is trying to do. But now we have to change our culture in a way to say, you know what, being an IMCOM chaplain or being the FORCECOM chaplain, both of those are vitally important to our core. One's not more important than the other. If so, you've got a divorce, right? And you've got somewhat of a dysfunctional community instead of a very functional one. So as you try to think of that. So that's sort of our takeaway. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions from that? That was very good. I have to at least bring out my inner geek to say that looks a lot like what Tony Stark found in Iron Man 2. Made a whole new element. Okay, so what we've got, let's do family life. Who's my family life guy? Family life ministry.
Thank you, sir. I'm Chaplain Bart Herndon. I'm here at Leavenworth, and I just want to say that I had a wonderful group, wonderful people. We had a wonderful discussion. It definitely, the people that were there, very passionate about how to help and care for families, soldiers, and their spouses, along with their children as well. And so one of the means that we talked about to provide family ministry, and there are many, is through small group, but more in particular, home groups. Providing family ministry through home groups. Now, when you look at the family needs today, there are many. And we had a wonderful discussion about the different needs that families have. We had the need for parenting training. We had the need to help spouses and families to succeed during the holidays. And the discussion went on and on of the different needs that families have. But we thought that one of the means to help address many of those questions or concerns or those issues that young families bring up could be at least helped in home groups. Now, here's where the paradigm shift comes in. Now, when you think of a family ministry and you think of home groups, your target audience is mainly addressing soldiers and their spouse along with their children. But this is the particular challenge that we thought of that could be helpful, is not only have it for soldiers and spouses and young families, or also open it up to single soldiers. Now, I have the wonderful opportunity to have a son who's 27 years old, and he's single. He's not married. He fits within this particular demographics that, younger men and women are delaying marriage. But yet, just like with any of us, they have needs, they have concerns, they have emotional needs, they have nurturing needs, like all of us. Well, I will just say that when I my son comes home, and he was in Boston, and now he's moving to Dallas, Texas. But when he would come home, and we just love those opportunities to be able to spend with our son. We don't get that much. But it really energized him. It helped to really give him that reset, kind of energizing kind of shot in the arm that he needed. And I think that there are a lot of young soldiers today who, when they're running with their peers, so to say, it can be a pretty fast-paced lifestyle, if you know what I mean. And sometimes the things that are brought up, hey, let's do this, let's do that, or, you know, we ought to consider this, may not always be the healthiest thing to do. But for young soldiers to be a part of a home group where you have the stability, where you have people who have maybe lived that kind of lifestyle, but yet saw the cons to doing those kind of things and could walk alongside them, put their arm around them, and kind of mentor them into considering other things, other kind of healthy ways of going about life. So with the home group, we see it as an inward ministry of helping young families, but also single soldiers, but also an outward ministry as well. So, you know, the meta model is not a new thing. You know, I mean, this idea of home groups has been around for a long time. But there are particular challenges in the military that come with home groups. As a matter of fact, we're talking about in the Korea Peninsula today, fraternization, the issue of that. The way I understand it, and I could be wrong, and please correct me if I'm wrong. The way I understand it, for officers and NCOs even, and enlisted folks, they're not supposed to, you know, to meet and gather together in certain things as home groups, and that's definitely a constraint. But within those particular areas where we're not facing any legal problems, the home group could be a very wonderful opportunity for ministry, and also a way that young soldiers could be mentored and discipled to say, you know what, I'd like to start my own kind of home group for other single soldiers, and be an outreach to others to be that positive source in their lives that helps them get them on the right road, and also provides that nurturing element to be an encourager, to be one that prays for them when they're really hurting and in despair. Now, another challenge that comes with home groups that's, I see, directly focused on IMCOM, and that is to provide the particular training, leadership training, that's needed to be able to have a successful home group. You know, it could be connected to the sermons that are preached each Sunday. You know, you kind of spring off of what the particular pastor, chaplain was speaking on. That could be a topic of discussion maybe even before the sermon that Sunday or afterwards. But the particular training that goes in and helping to be a group leader that knows how to handle group dialogue and group dynamics, that really helps families and soldiers when they come in to feel accepted and cared for and loved. That kind of training to do that is not easy. And it takes a consistent effort that's time consuming. But boy, when it's done right, it can pay off great dividends to help our young soldiers as well as young families as well in many different ways. So challenge is there. The challenge is definitely the issue of fraternization, the issue of the need for continual leadership training. But yet, in regard to breaking the status quo, I think it's a means that could definitely help in a lot of wonderful ways. So, what are your questions?
All right. Any questions on that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. First concern I have is accountability. You touched on it a little bit. But accountability for the training piece is one thing, but that home is kind of an intimate space, especially for me as a battalion chaplain. There's a certain level where I want to box off and keep for my family. And another challenge is that when you invite single soldiers in, I got a 15 and 16-year-old daughters. That is a real concern for me in that home intimate space where I'm allowing single soldiers to be in that sensitive area.
No, and I hear what you're saying, and those are definite things that have to be considered in inviting single soldiers in. But I will say this, that as far as that home sacred space, that when those that are leaders, along with their spouse, and then they have a particular child care dynamic in place that provides a safe environment, when they agree upon wanting to do this, that they feel called to do this, then I think that's an important dynamic, that you're not infringing upon your spouse's issue. This is my sacred space. I don't like to have to be. And your children, they have a safe area where they don't feel, left out, that they're cared for during that time, or maybe even can participate along with other children of other families that attend. I think that all has to be considered. But yet I've been a part of leading several home groups, especially at Fort Irwin. And Fort Irwin is an isolated environment. And these small groups, they are so needed. I'm telling you, it's a hard place. But anyway, I definitely agree with you. It is something, those particular categories are things that have to be considered and thought through. And definitely the religious support operations chaplain, the garrison chaplain, it definitely is not something that you just do on your own and say, hey, we're going to start a home group and do it on your own. It has to be coordinated and approved. There has to be accountability, like you're saying. Right? You can't be a lone ranger, sir.
I think that's a great point, and I absolutely agree. So when we do it intentionally, it is an ongoing ministry, and we want to be focused on it. Then we have that leadership, we have that accountability. And maybe if you're doing the single soldier and you have it could be a family member says, oh, I'm raising my hand, but again, I don't need to have, my house is just not set up that way, or the dynamics of my house. We can partner with other agencies. You become the lead, and someone else can host. And so they feel all they have to do is open the doors. They want to be a great hospitality, and you're taking the leadership. So, okay, I don't have to worry about facilitating, leading. Cadence Ministry does their off-post, generally their coffee house ministry, or again, some of our other partners have, that is their niche ministry, is to do home groups. And so we partner with them. Josh, got something?
One of the things that we are finding is that Gen Z really wants to be part of a family. And so I've just, how do I say it? I have 6 daughters, and so it is an intimate kind of thing for me, but it's still worth the risk, because the home is such a powerful thing. 2 times we've had a group in our home, and we've tried to transition it to a chapel, and it always just loses some of the magic. And so I think it's worth the risk as somebody with 6 daughters. And so I just want to say that.
Okay, we're going to let Bart go. Let me pass the mic. I'm going to ask since it sounds like we're in the same vein, if our religious ed would come up and talk, because home groups could be just another type of a Bible study or some type of event.
Could be, yeah. If you need somebody to help train those, I think a religious educator might be able to help you with that. So, some of the challenges we discussed, first is the whole understanding and appreciation about what religious education is and could be. Oftentimes we think about religious education, we think Sunday school and VBS, and that's about the extent of it. And unfortunately, it is far more than that. And I'll take a couple minutes to say this about religious education as it relates to readiness. Soldiers, when you think about religious education and you think about the 5 pillars of soldier and families' comprehensive fitness, we understand the spiritual component, and certainly religious education plays a part in that. We think about how we strengthen families. Think about some of the religious education programs that we use. Think about how families are engaged, not just in worship service, but how families come and participate in religious education activities. Does that strengthen the family? In addition to that, families who are engaged, there's lots of studies that shows families who are engaged not just in worship, but also engaged in religious education activities, they're stronger families, and they're connected to a community at a deeper level. And then finally, if you've got individuals who are have healthy families, they're healthy spiritually, they're connected to a community, they are physically and emotionally healthier. So that touches, I would argue, religious education touches all of that. So when we take one of the challenges, when we take religious education, and particularly our religious educators, and they spend a great deal of their time processing background checks and making purchases, that's a waste of talent. I'm trying to be objective here, but it's a waste of talent. It's like taking an 06 and say, sir, the only thing we need you to do is pray for the commander's ceremonies. That's it. That's a waste. So we need to revision about how to best use religious education and religious educators. Because of this assumption, too, we have a tendency to pigeonhole religious education to just garrison ministry, just on Sunday morning, or maybe a midweek program. We need to think up again about bridging that gap out to our communities, out to our families, out to Bible studies in the units. There's so much more that a religious educator could offer our chaplain corps. Let's also talk about some of the challenges related to resources. We all get it. You know, child care is important. We've got a limited number of volunteers. Space is always challenging, particularly when we only vision religious education occurring in a building on a Sunday morning. We've got to think much, much broader than that. We talk some about third spaces. Where else can we do religious education that's not so religious-y, so churchy? Can we do it outside of a chapel? Can we do it outside of a chaplain's home? Not necessarily anything wrong with that. Can we do it in a coffee shop? Can we do it at the PX and food court? Certainly, all those things can happen. The other thing that I think was important, talking about technology. Again, we've mentioned this throughout the couple of days we've been here, but technology is a gateway for reaching our young soldiers, and we are so far behind in the use of technology in religious education and our worship. So, way forward, we've got a kind of a summation statement, and then I want to flex it out a little bit. So, the way forward: assault outdated assumptions of what religious education is by allowing for and encouraging a diverse community for faith formation across generations, including debate, the arts, and service outside the walls of the chapel. One of the things I found very interesting in our discussion is that young people are not afraid to talk about things that we tend to kind of pull back from. So young folks want genuine debate. They want to kick an idea back and forth. And so if you want to talk about same-sex marriage, we might kind of go, well, we already know the answer to that. You can't, Our young people like, no, wait a minute. Let's talk about this. And they want respectful discussion to occur. And so we need to be able to do that and not be afraid of that. And go back to maybe a generation or so where apologetics was kind of the in thing. Young people like to learn. They're pulling in information, and they want to look at all sides of it. So we need to not be afraid of letting them do that and letting them make their own decision and not tell them this is what you must believe. Let them make that decision themselves. All right, that's kind of the summation of it. What questions would you have?
Sir, thank you for talking about that. You talked briefly about the phone and the next generation. Would it be a proper place for the religious educators and education office to house that discussion for the next generation, bringing in interfaith? We are the Chaplain Corps. Our whole goal is to serve God and country. That means we do it in a pluralistic society. We're all after the same goal for that higher being. So would it be a religious educator's position to facilitate that discussion across religious lines respectfully and well done, especially incorporating the modern technology and community?
Yes, because again, one of the things to appreciate, I think, about religious educators is
They come with similar credentials that you have. What we don't have is an endorser telling us what we can and cannot do. And so as a religious educator who's got some familiarity with the different religious groups, they can help a person kind of navigate that and come to an understanding of, here's what Islam believes, here's what the Jewish faith believes, here's what Baptists believe, here's what Charismatics believe, here's what, and then allow the individual to appreciate all of that and make their own decision about where they stand. Okay? Anything else? Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thank you. I would also, that makes the case, when we were a little more in depth in the war in Iraq, we continued to discuss religious engagements with religious leaders and overseas, and we were demanding that chaplains specifically, and now our religious affairs specialists amp up their knowledge of religious practices, understanding of different faith groups. That even goes into layers of religious accommodation now, so that we have subject matter experts. Well, DREs are also those people we can lean on. And so we need to continue to wrap them in as something that we have.
Yep. I have a question for you. What is the, and it's probably an ignorant question, but what is the difference between a world religion SME that we produce from chaplains and the DRE? It seems like they're already there and their job is to be a subject matter expert on each of these.
Okay, so the question, because I want to capture it, is what's the difference between a world religion SME and what would a DRE? Grace would like to answer, so I would love to hear from the doctor.
I think one would be a matter of focus. Since our subject matter expertise is in education, what we should be able to do for you right off the bat is we have a general idea of basic tenets and also their epistemologies, their ways of coming to know the divine, and how they go through the process of faith formation, so that we can, what a world religions person knows the details of the religions themselves. Our expertise is, okay, within that religious tradition, how are people formed in their faith? So for example, if you have an Islamic community or a Jewish community, your world religions people can give you the tenets of their religion. We can help you design programs, processes, spaces to help them to engage in faith formation. Does that help in some way?
So my second question to that would be, if I'm running a Christian youth group out of my faith tradition, but because millennials and the next generation, they are friends with each other across the line. They don't care. I applied for that. Would I bring you or the RE in and say, hey, can you teach? This week we're going to cover Islam. Next week we're going to talk about paganism. Can you teach and facilitate that discussion, and also give a front education of what they believe, how they're formed, and then facilitate that conversation? And I would contact you for the director of religious education.
I would say,
Yes.
looking at my colleagues, not only are there curriculum resources that do that we can access, but we can also design our own, work with you as the chaplain, make sure we're all on board, do the PAO work we need to do to make sure we're all on board, and that becomes an outstanding program.
And let me, I'm going to move on and ask training to come up, because I think that's a natural connection. But real quick, because I own two of those world religions dudes, Josh in the back there, and Chaplain Troy Allen, if everybody knows him, is out at DLI. Those positions that they get masters for is really in order to inject into professional military education and then help the institution understand the world religions factors. We have very few of them on staff. Now, some of them are out here in the audience. They got their masters and they never tell anybody that they got world religions. But they are helpful as knowledgeable people. Again, almost every post camp and station have a director of religious education who has those really great nuances of that faith formation, which is probably even more critical for us when a commander says, hey, I had a great commander who every other week would ask me, okay, so what are you doing about Jewish soldiers? What are you going to do about my Native American soldiers? What are you going to do about my Buddhist soldiers? He demanded of me to come up with a plan. I went to my DRE to say, I don't know what they do. I just know they don't do me. So help me out, okay? And that was very helpful. All right, training, which I gave them the instructions that training meant don't just be myopically focused on UMT training. Training is all facets of when we are intersecting in the training domain with the next generation. So
Thank you, sir. Good morning, I'm Jason Deshane, and as we gathered to discuss training, one of the challenges in talking about training is, and I'm sure everybody in here has been in this situation, we have all experienced bad training. And so the first part is licking the wounds and sharing the horror stories and telling everybody all of the times that we have seen training done wrong. And my hope is to not add 5 more minutes of bad training to your day. But we look at, in breaking down training, we looked at a couple of different areas. First, we looked at the obstacles to conducting training. Second, we examined what are some of the resources that are out there to help facilitate training. Third, we looked at what are some areas that we can improve upon. And then last but not least, we looked at what ideas we have in order to make training more effective. And across those 4 categories, what came out were 3 major themes. The first is collaboration, the second is intentionality, and the third is communication. And I'm going to break those down a little bit for you here. So under the collaboration piece, something that came up for us very early in the discussion was the importance of leadership and collaboration, from conceptualization through execution, okay? So leadership needed to help facilitate what is the vision, what is the intent, and who's the audience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the sense of working across not only what is needed for battalion UMTs, but brigade, what's needed at the division level, what's needed with cross-partners, for example, between ForceCom and MedCom and INSCOM, or the different persons that are there, IMCOM, and then also the institutional level. Bringing that all together is an important thing, because it helps create buy-in, which leads to participation. And in creating that participation, there's another important factor in collaboration that leadership provides, and that is the forcing function sometimes necessary to ensure that it's completed and executed as intended. The second was the intentionality piece. In looking at intentionality, you had to make sure that you had the right training at the right time with the right audience. Because that was something that came out consistently in our horror stories, was that you had senior leaders in training that was really focused on our most junior, and vice versa. You had junior folks sitting in training that was really intended for more strategic level type audiences. And it's not that some cross-pollination is not bad, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what is the value here if we're just wasting people's times? Does the 56 mic level 1 skill trainer need to be in the same training that's being focused specifically at chaplains, and particularly religious support execution? So right training, right time, right audience. The next thing was that the intentionality of balancing planned training that was planned 6 and 12 months out with that of the reactionary training that often comes down the pike. And how does that reactionary training fit into that right time, right place, right audience? The next was another thing about being intentional about creating an environment that was conducive to coaching, mentoring, and teaching. That being intentional about that, spending that time together and looking at providing information in a way that helps create learning. And then last but not least, the communication piece. So we needed to develop a means of sharing not just our successes and our lessons learned, but also how things failed, where we need to improve, so that the mistakes and lessons learned at the 101st at Fort Campbell impact and can be shared with those that are doing the same things at the 25th ID at Schofield Barracks and across the force. And one of the things that we also talked about was, in reference to that resourcing, is the utilization of some of the resources that are already available. So for example, the USAC's training portal has information that's out there to help explain, for example, what family life does. But having a place where, for me as a battalion chaplain, if somebody says, hey, I want to do some ethics training, I can go on that same portal, go ethics training, and find maybe the top 3 or 5 ethics trainings that are out there that have been developed by somebody, sent up, went through a clearinghouse, maybe got a little bit of, polish and wax from a developmental education specialist who understands what training looks like and puts it in a nice polished format so that I can go out there, put those slides up, print the handouts out, and execute quality training for my unit that has the ability to be replicated across the board that doesn't rely specifically on my ability to teach, lead, or develop, but is a way in which I can help facilitate training that promotes some consistency and also, again, just helps so that you're not always starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel each time. So those are the three themes, again, collaboration, intentionality, and communication. And I invite your questions.
Any questions? It's all good. We're all part of becoming better trainers. Go ahead and give that to Josh. And I do appreciate that. That's why I did want to talk about that part, because, and I hope that infuses you again, especially our chaplains and our religious affairs specialists. We're the people. So hopefully you can help your unit be better trainers, better communicators, intentional about what they do, hit the audience. We can help develop that other, without even being religious support fixed, you know, it's something that you can help them get better at. Josh, come on up and let's see, I think I gave you, you have pastoral care. Okay, thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Our group, I will confess some bias of our group. It was all majors, right? So you're going to get that perspective there. We had no millennials. It was all majors. So some of the challenges we looked at, some of them are perennial challenges most of you in the room are familiar with, of lack of training and experience. We have chaplains that show up maybe that had one class in seminary and counseling, and now this becomes a significant part of their life. I might have been one of those chaplains, right, that showed up with a skill set that may have been lacking in that area. Another area we saw a challenge in was in the emerging sexual mores and gender norms of our society, of course, with the restricted and unrestricted emphasis, and this is a area that probably needs continued evolved guidance from the strategic realm. And then another place we looked at challenges in pastoral care and counseling was really what we saw is, and this is a two-part and where we're going to focus, but in the leadership. In particular, chaplains themselves. We've all heard of care to the caregiver initiatives. Chaplains a lot of times have problems getting that pastoral care and counseling. We're not very good at systematizing that. Of course, we all know AR 165-1, our supervisory roles sort of conflict there, and sometimes chaplains have some problems knowing where to go to get confidential care and counseling. The Corps has tried to do some things over the years. Some of you might remember the gray beard effort that we had. I don't think it, this is a personal thing, maybe I get in trouble for this. I don't think it went over very well. It probably sputtered a little bit. I don't know anybody personally that's participating in it. And then the second part of that is care for the leadership. You know, the Chief of Chaplains has this great initiative going on to support to the GO, and we sort of thought that's another area that's lacking. Let's push that down a little bit and support to battalion commanders and brigade commanders. The lieutenant colonel and the colonel level is an area that we saw that there's a lot of lack of support sometimes. This is also connected to the chaplain issue in that sometimes the supervisory roles confuse that, right? And you know, many of you, I'm sure, have had great relationships where you've had supervisors that would talk to you about their personal issues, but some of them didn't, and there was that wall that is there. And so we identified that as a need that maybe it'd be good if they had some direction as well as to where they could get pastoral care and counseling. So this leads us to our one big idea. You know, some of the challenges, the lack of training and experience, we always thought there's initiatives out there, CPRT, the restricted, unrestricted issue, we need emergency strategic guidance, but we thought we could make our money sort of with a Maxwell approach that everything rises and falls on leadership if we focused on the pastoral care and support to leadership, both chaplains and the colonel level of leadership. So our big idea is sort of a two-part thing once again, and it's a C2C and L2L, care to the caregiver and a leader-to-leader kind of program. So on the care to caregiver side, we thought we were brainstorming, and the best single, we both agreed, it was unanimous in the room, the best care to the caregiver thing that we've ever participated in and I think, Brandon, you were there for this, was that at the chaplain school, when Tom Allen was running the C4 course, and he did a retreat, essentially just for chaplains. Took us out, and there was training, there was counseling if you wanted it, there was fellowship, and it was a life-giving experience. And some of you in the room were there and were able to participate in that. And we said, what if we institutionalized that? What if we made a care to the caregiver center at the chaplain school? It'd probably be infeasible to, even if we could get the chief or somebody strategically to buy off on making a cell to go around and do this, it would cost too much money. But what if we institutionalized it, took that idea once again that group of leaders had and extended it? So what if we had care to caregiver center at the chaplain school, and at those gated things that we all go to, starting at the C4 level, we all go to C4, we all eventually have to go to the brigade course. If you keep on going to the lieutenant colonel course, what if we institutionalized that kind of program there, and there was intentional time, maybe with a senior successful, complete family life chaplain there running the care to caregiver center, that when you come to these courses, you get that care, you get that counseling. They can be available for that electronically through WebEx or something throughout the year as well, but what if that was systematized? So that's our first part of the care to the caregiver part. Now the leader-to-leader part, we thought, how do we institutionalize care for those battalion commanders and brigade commanders? And we thought this is our great time of revenge, right? You know, usually colonels and lieutenant colonels make work for majors, but here in this room full of majors, we can make work for lieutenant colonels and colonels. So it probably will go 0.0 meters, but here's our idea. What if we, once again, institutionalize a leader-to-leader thing where from outside their chain of command, not a chaplain that they're rated in, but think of like a strong bonds type alpha event that would occur, that facilitated by other colonels or lieutenant colonels in the chaplaincies for leaders at a given duty station. They receive funding to do this, maybe on a quarterly basis. They can bring in battalion commanders and brigade commanders and do a leadership check with them. How are you doing? You know, what are your concerns? What are your family concerns? Where they can receive pastoral care and counseling from a peer, not in their chain of command, that they might be a little bit more open to talking to than someone who is confused by rating or is complicated by rating chain things. So that's our sort of C2C, L2L big idea. Subject to your questions, sir, and the group.
That's great. Any questions? I really like that. I like, that's a good package. We need to write that one up. Bill's got a question.
Just more of a feedback on that last one. And that's a great recommendation. What I encourage younger chaplains to consider is you can't wait for someone else to fix that. I learned after it was too late that my leaders, my battalion commander, my sergeant major needed me to be their pastor, even when they didn't know they needed me to be their pastor. So it's hard. There's 1,000 reasons not to, but we'll keep pushing that idea. It's great. Don't wait for someone else to pastor your commander. You're called for such a time as this. You were ordained by God to be there for that leader. So step up to that challenge and do it. In spite of it's uncomfortable. When you make room for that, they will let you in sometimes because they won't initially and they won't the second time, the third time, but leadership is lonely at the top. So just wanted to not lose sight of that. Continue to step up to that challenge because leaders are falling into moral failure at greater number than ever before. And I used to think as a battalion chaplain that they would go peer to peer. The problem is their peers know their rater. So as hard as it is for you to think that they would go to you as a captain, it's even harder for them to go to your boss because he has the ear of his rater. So just something to think about.
No, thank you. As a branch over here to, you got spiritual fitness, right? Is that my last one? As a segue, I was going to make the case that leader to leader is very important. Again, the Army is focused on this care to the caregiver, our senior leader care, moral failures and stuff. But there's no reason, battalion chaplains, for you to take that same idea and invest in squad leaders, platoon sergeants, leaders that need to hear it from another level, and you're going to take the same methodology and grow them. I'm also a firm believer that my best friends that are now senior leaders in our Army were my best friends as captains. They were my peer. They were my no-kidding battle buddy, hanging out, getting beer together guy that now values a chaplain as a battalion commander or as a brigade commander because he understands relationship. So the more you invest in that, you're paying it forward for some other chaplain in the future. You're taking care of that leader before they became a battalion commander, okay? That's, I think, important. Which kind of segues to spiritual fitness is supposed to be that big catch-all bucket thing that we love to do. So that's our last of our buckets, so let's hear it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay West. I am the operations chaplain at Forces Command. We, as Chaplain Wake, said we're given the task of looking at spiritual fitness. Again, as the other group, some challenges. We took a little different path, though, and found we identified the challenges, but then we spent time identifying a lot of areas of agreement within spiritual fitness. And I think you see behind me some of our scratchings on the whiteboard. Obviously, the challenge that was named very, very quickly is one that's probably familiar to every one of us in the room. What is it? All right, what is spiritual fitness? How do we do it? Do we do it? What population do we target? And then there's a whole debate you see there around spirituality. We get wrapped up in the spirituality versus religion debate. And we spent some time on that, but then we came to the conclusion that that is a distractor. All right, that diverts our attention from what the Army expects from us and what commanders and soldiers need from us. All right, so we transitioned out of that into some areas of agreement. So what did we agree on? We agreed that everyone has lens through which they view the world. Doesn't matter whether you're, whichever category, you know, that Mr. Kinnaman spoke about yesterday, it makes no difference which one of those categories a soldier may fall into. He or she still has a lens through which they view the world. Some have a religious lens, some have a spiritual lens. Some may say they have neither. Don't get wrapped up in fighting that debate with that person because it's their lens. We agreed that all have beliefs that shape how they relate to others and how they make meaning of the world around them. Okay. So after identifying some areas of agreement, we looked at, and you see there, kind of off to the right side of that whiteboard, 3 components of spiritual fitness. Those are actually 3 components that the chaplain of the Marine Corps talks about. When he talks about developing spiritual fitness and spiritually fit Marines, he talks about those 3 things. All right? And you see them there. A personal, how does the chaplain help soldiers understand, make sense of their personal faith or belief system? How does the chaplain help soldiers understand their personal value systems? And by the way, we spent some time talking about Army values and how that really is about the lowest common denominator of any value system that can be created. All right? But how do we understand that? Especially as it may apply to our value systems. And then how does the chaplain help soldiers understand their personal morality and decision making? Okay. Now, I've used the word chaplain very intentionally in each of those cases because we function from a religious perspective. There's a role for the 56 Mike. There's a role, as we've talked, for the DREs, But the chaplain is uniquely postured to talk about those things from a religious perspective. Matter of fact, we're kind of expected to talk about those things from a religious perspective, aren't we? So do that. All right? Do that. So what is spiritual fitness? Spiritual fitness are those events that are focused on helping soldiers understand their personal faith and or belief systems, integrating their personal values while understanding how their belief system of morality impacts on their decision making. It is not, spiritual fitness is not any of us, whether we're 56 alphas, 56 mics, DREs, ministry partners, whatever other term or word we want to use, it is not us getting in the face of our soldiers and families and helping them understand how their belief system is wrong. All right? We agreed on that. Rather, it is us being simply a presence that helps them understand how their belief systems impact on their lives. And then when given the opportunity to step in and help make sense. The way ahead for how we do spiritual fitness. Well, first of all, it's got to be contextualized. We agreed that there is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all spiritual fitness program. So the way ahead, stop looking for it. Just stop. It's got to be tied to readiness. If you are in any way tied to the Army right now and you don't understand that everything the Army does right now is readiness focused, you've missed that boat and you're missing opportunities to provide religious support to the Army. Okay? Now, we know that the Army has defined 4 domains or pillars, if you will, of readiness, one of which is leader development. So let's begin to understand spiritual fitness events in terms of leader development language. It's got to be, spiritual fitness events have to be echeloned. Right, you just heard, and we discussed in our group, commanders deal with an entirely different set of problems and stressors than does a squad. So why do we approach both the same? Echelon spiritual fitness events to account for the different stressors that exist in any formation. Spiritual fitness events have to be approached from a coaching and developing perspective, not a directing perspective. You want to gain credibility, listen to folks. Let them tell their story. Become a participant in that to the extent that you are invited in. You want to not have credibility, approach folks and just tell them right up front where they're wrong. That works for all of us, doesn't it? Spiritual fitness events, we've got to design events that help soldiers align their beliefs and their actions. All right? How do we help soldiers bridge that moral dissonance that sometimes exists between what I thought I believed but what I've seen or done? Bridging that is key to spiritual fitness. And then finally, spiritual fitness events have to build community, not connectedness. All right? We are all connected, but are we in community? And there's a unique role for the chaplain corps to play, I think, in the Army, not at building connectedness, but in building community. So those are some of the ways ahead. Again, if you want one single recommendation from I think from our group that we would collectively share, it's what I said to you a few minutes ago. Don't wait for the chaplain corps or for the Army, or for some command level chaplain section to publish a one-size-fits-all, do this program and you will build spiritual fitness and resilience in your formation. It's your commander's program. Oh, I didn't say that, did I? That's a key factor as well. Nest your spiritual fitness events on the training calendar and align them with the commander's intent. Do that, and we may have some success. Sir?
Any questions on that? Go ahead.
Of course. Can you give us an example of how to produce something that illustrates community versus connectedness?
No, I'm not going to, but I'll ask members of the group. Yeah, examples of how to build community versus connectedness. Here, take this.
One of the things that we talked about in our social media stuff is most people today are using social media as a way to ask for stuff or promote something. And a real way to build community, just like an everyday thing, is if I'm always asking you for something, then that's just going to be, we're connected, we're talking. But if I'm giving you stuff, if I'm adding value to you as an individual on a daily basis and on a regular basis, that I see you as an actual person, not a tool or something to get something from or to check a box, then that's what builds community. So when we use social media, then we would give, add value to individual. And I think it's the same thing for these types of events in spiritual fitness is, we're not just telling them what, and we talked about this in our group with social media or with spiritual fitness, is we're not just telling them what they need to believe, but we're through relationship helping them, giving them the tools and helping them develop those beliefs and refine them and grow in that. So that can look at all different ways.
Let me give you another example.
Yeah, so my view of spiritual fitness has always been the new epicenter of worship is actually the small group, no longer the chapel program. So when we do spiritual fitness, it's the idea of meeting the soldiers, of course, where they are, and we know that's a tagline we throw at everything, but we have soldiers that do different things. One of the programs we developed was Rolling with the Chaplain. A lot of my soldiers, 25th ID, very heavy on combatives. So what we do is we develop a program with instructors where we actually go there, we make a joke out of it, come try to tap out the chaplain. And it gives us a chance to get a small group together and form a family. Somebody before mentioned home groups. Sometimes I don't have all the soldiers come to my house. I got 4 little girls in my house. But at the same time, we can create those small groups in different places that the soldiers still love to go and love to be. And they come there, we do a devotion, we pray with them. The instructors are taught as they're teaching combatives, they're also saying things that are leading into the message, leading into their purpose in life and stuff. And then we also give a message at the end of it also. And items like that we have been doing have been exploding. And not only with our, if you want to call it younger soldiers, but also with our soldiers around my age. I'm not going to say how old I am because I'm old. And soldiers that are older and are in command. And there's always something you can do to draw them together into community, get off the Facebook, get off the text, get off the Foursquare, whatever else we use to send stuff out to people, and just gather together.
We got one more. Go ahead.
So up at Tiff Mountain Division, one of the things that we were able to pilot is I worked with the USO to do a single soldier video game tournament. So all my guys are gamers. They're in the barracks gaming. It was the first time that some of them had left the barracks since arriving at drum. So you can create that community in other spaces, not just at home. So, and that was a huge event. And I just had soldiers from all over the brigade just show up. It was just for my battalion, but everybody heard about it, and video games were at the USO. Yeah, they opened their doors. And we got them to talk about volunteering and getting out of the barracks and resiliency. So it kind of hit 2 big big ticket factors with our single soldiers because we had seen a rise in trends in our soldiers. So
Do not leave here without getting these two guys' email. Send them a note about what they just described and begin to share. That's probably a way ahead.
Yeah, we got to share more of our practices and stuff. Thank you, Jay. And I have to say that, again, these great ideas, we want to continue to spiral and allow for other people to hear about them. And we're excited by all the great work. Thank you very much for what you've done for a day and a half. I mean, think about how much we've been able to actually accomplish in a day and a half. And hopefully, again, minds have been blown. There's opportunity for you to go home and make a difference. And we want to really engage you in doing so.